The desert night in Tucson, Arizona is the kind of dark that swallows everything whole. No city glow reaching the foothills. No ambient noise drifting up from the valley. Just the silence of a neighborhood that has been quiet and unchanged for decades, where the same families have lived on the same streets for so long that the sound of an unfamiliar engine would wake a light sleeper. Nobody woke up that night. Nobody heard what happened. Nobody saw what was coming. But at exactly 1:47 in the morning on February 1, 2026, a security camera on a quiet residential street in the Catalina foothills recorded something that would stop investigators cold. A figure. Alone. Moving through the darkness with a stillness that did not belong to someone lost or confused or acting on impulse. This person moved with the absolute, unhurried confidence of someone who had already been here before. They knew exactly where they were going. They knew exactly what they were looking for. And in one precise, deliberate movement, they reached out and made the only camera on that property go dark. Inside that house was an 84-year-old woman named Nancy Guthrie. She had lived on that street for over 50 years. She had watched the desert seasons change outside her window more times than she could count. She had raised her children inside those walls, buried her husband, built a life so deeply rooted in that neighborhood that the house and the woman had become inseparable in the minds of everyone who loved her. Less than 4 hours earlier, she had been sitting at her daughter's dinner table. Laughing. Safe. Surrounded by family. By sunrise, she was gone. And the question that would consume federal investigators, behavioral analysts, and millions of people across the internet in the weeks that followed was not simply who took her. It was something far more chilling. Something that the footage itself, frame by frame, kept screaming into the silence. Who told him exactly where to look? If you are new to this channel and cases like this keep you up at night the way they keep me up, subscribe to Stories of the Missing J right now and hit that notification bell. Every week this channel goes beyond the headlines and deep into the forensic details that most coverage never reaches. Stay with me on this one. Because what this investigation uncovered goes far deeper than a single night in the desert. And the closer you look at the evidence, the more one devastating truth becomes impossible to ignore. Someone who knew Nancy Guthrie may have helped destroy her world. To understand the full weight of what happened in those early morning hours of February 1st, you have to first understand the woman at the center of it. Because Nancy Guthrie was not an abstraction. She was not a case number or a news ticker. She was a person with a history and a neighborhood and a life that stretched back more than 8 decades. She was born in Fort Wright, Kentucky in January of 1942. She came of age in a different America, married, built a family, and eventually planted herself in the sun-baked soil of Tucson, Arizona, a city that would become the only home that truly mattered to her. She moved into that single-story brick house in the Catalina foothills and she never left. Over 50 years in the same rooms. Over 50 years watching the same desert light move across the same walls at the same hour every morning. She raised 3 children largely on her own after her husband Charles died suddenly of a cardiac event in 1988, when her youngest child was still in high school. She did not crumble. She worked. She showed up. She spent nearly 2 decades in public relations at the University of Arizona, building a professional life with the same quiet determination that defined everything else about her. By every account from every person who knew her, Nancy Guthrie was the kind of woman who made a neighborhood feel like a community. The kind of presence you do not fully appreciate until it is gone. She was also the mother of Savannah Guthrie, co-anchor of NBC's Today Show, one of the most recognized faces in American morning television. That fact matters for one specific reason. Not because celebrity proximity changes what happened to Nancy. It doesn't. But it explains in precise terms why this case detonated across every media platform within hours of the missing person report being filed. It explains why security footage from a quiet residential street in Tucson was being dissected by millions of people before most of the country had finished their morning coffee. It explains the scale of public attention that descended on this case like a wave. And beneath all of that noise, beneath the celebrity connection and the media frenzy, was a forensic investigation moving quietly and methodically toward a conclusion that the evidence had been pointing to from the very first hour. The evening of January 31st, 2026 began the way most evenings in a close family begin. Ordinarily. Warmly. Without any shadow of what was coming. Nancy attended a family dinner at the Tucson home of her daughter Annie and Annie's husband, Tommaso Caione. The meal was routine. Family conversation. The comfortable rhythm of people who know each other well enough to sit in comfortable silence between sentences. Nobody at that table had any reason to believe that the evening was anything other than what it appeared to be. At 9:48 in the evening, Nancy was driven home. At 9:50, the garage door closed. That moment, that precise, electronically logged, time-stamped moment, became the forensic foundation of the entire federal investigation. Everything that investigators could verify, every confirmed fact about Nancy Guthrie's whereabouts and condition, ended at 9:50 in the evening on January 31st. The garage door closed. The signal was recorded by the home security system. And Nancy Guthrie was inside that house. What happened next should have been nothing. She should have made herself a cup of tea, or settled into her chair, or turned on the television the way she had done 10,000 times before in that house. The desert should have gone quiet around her the way it always did. The night should have passed. Instead, the street went silent in a different way. The house went dark. And for 3 hours and 57 minutes, not a single alarm triggered inside that residence. Not a single sensor activated. Not a single device registered any movement or activity. The house was still. Nancy was inside. And somewhere out in that desert darkness, something was moving toward her. At 1:47 in the morning, it arrived. The footage from Nancy Guthrie's Google Nest doorbell camera is the kind of recording that investigators describe as a gift and a horror simultaneously. A gift because it exists at all. A horror because of what it shows. A figure enters the frame. The timestamp burns in the corner. 1:47. The street behind the figure is completely empty. No vehicle visible. No second person visible. Just one individual moving through the absolute darkness of a residential street in the middle of the night. Watch the approach. This is where trained investigators and casual viewers begin to see completely different things. A stranger approaching an unfamiliar property at night moves a specific way. They slow down. They scan. Their eyes move across the facade of a building looking for points of entry, for signs of occupancy, for hazards they have not anticipated. Their body language carries the weight of uncertainty because they are processing an environment they do not fully know. This figure does none of that. Head down. Straight line.
No scanning. No hesitation.
No deviation of any kind from a direct path that leads in one unbroken movement from the edge of the frame to the doorbell camera mounted beside the front door. And then, in a single precise gesture, the camera goes dark. The entire sequence takes seconds. From frame entry to blackout. Seconds. Former FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffendafer reviewed this footage and her assessment was immediate and unambiguous. The person in that clip did not discover the camera. They already knew exactly where it was. The head-down approach followed by eyes up only at the moment of arrival is a behavioral signature that investigators recognize specifically. It is what a person looks like when they are executing a movement they have already mentally rehearsed. When they are completing a task rather than solving a problem. This person had been here before. They had stood on this porch before. They had looked at this camera before. And they came back on the night of February 1st with a plan already fully formed. On February 10, 2026, FBI Director Kash Patel released 4 black and white images to the public. Stills recovered from Nancy Guthrie's doorbell camera by the FBI's Forensic Recovery Unit, working in direct collaboration with Google's technical team. Because here is what the perpetrator failed to account for. The footage had already uploaded to cloud servers before his hand ever reached the lens. The camera went dark. The data survived. Those images spread across every platform within hours. And what they showed the world was a figure so comprehensively covered that investigators understood immediately they were not dealing with someone acting on a sudden impulse. Full-face ski mask. Gloves covering every inch of both hands. Zipped jacket. Long pants. A backpack strapped securely to his back. A flashlight held between his teeth, keeping both hands free and operational. And a firearm sitting in a front holster at the waist. Not a single centimeter of exposed skin anywhere on that body. Former FBI Assistant Director Frank Figliuzzi was direct in his analysis. Every single item visible on that figure served a specific forensic purpose that was understood and planned in advance. Gloves eliminated fingerprint transfer at every point of contact. Full facial and body coverage eliminated the shedding of cellular material, skin cells, hair, that forensic collection teams would otherwise recover from the scene. The backpack indicated this person arrived fully expecting to carry something away from the property. The flashlight in the teeth was a deliberate choice to maintain full bilateral hand functionality throughout the operation. Each of those decisions was made before leaving the house. Each one represents a person sitting somewhere quiet, thinking through the forensic consequences of what they were about to do, and preparing a counter for each one.
This was not improvised.
This was engineered. Former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe flagged the weapon separately, and for a reason that matters to the behavioral profile. The holster placement, sitting low, near the center of the body, is not a position used by anyone with professional law enforcement or military training. It is functionally impractical. What it tells investigators is precise. This person had a firearm and made the decision to bring it. They were not trained in its professional use or carry. Organized, deliberate, forensically sophisticated preparation, paired with improvised, tactical execution. That combination narrows the profile considerably. Not a career criminal. Not a professional operative. Someone who constructed this plan carefully and specifically for this target, outside any professional framework. And that detail, constructed specifically for this target, is where the investigation pivots into its most disturbing dimension. Because the footage did not capture one visit. It captured evidence of at least two. Investigators confirmed that the masked figure had appeared at Nancy Guthrie's property on at least one occasion prior to the night of February 1st.
A reconnaissance visit.
A deliberate pre-operational trip to the property to study the exterior, identify the camera position, map the approach, and integrate that information into a plan that he would execute on a later date.
He came. He observed. He left. He returned.
Think about what that means. Somewhere on a date before January 31st, this person stood outside Nancy Guthrie's home in the Catalina foothills and studied it.
Looked at the door. Looked at the camera.
Looked at the potted plant sitting nearby that he would later use to conceal the lens. Made mental notes. Built a map inside his own head. And drove away knowing he would be back. That is not a crime of passion. That is not a random act of opportunistic violence against a vulnerable elderly woman. That is a targeted operation with a planning phase, an intelligence gathering phase, and an execution phase. Someone decided in advance and with deliberation that Nancy Guthrie was the target. The question that the behavioral evidence demanded from the very first week was devastatingly simple.
Why her?
And who told him enough about her life to make her the target? Inside that house, in those 41 minutes of darkness between 1:47 and 2:28, something else happened that the forensic record captured in a way the perpetrator never anticipated. Nancy Guthrie wore a pacemaker. A medical device implanted in her chest to regulate her heartbeat. That device transmitted health data wirelessly to her Apple Watch, which synced continuously to her phone. When investigators arrived at that residence, Nancy's phone was inside.
Her purse was inside.
Her wallet was inside. Her car was in the garage. Everything that belonged to Nancy Guthrie's daily life was exactly where it should have been. Everything except Nancy. At 2:28 in the morning on February 1st, the pacemaker application on her phone logged a disconnection event. The sync between her implanted device and her paired Apple equipment simply stopped. Digital forensics experts were precise about what that means. A pacemaker disconnection is not a medical alarm.
It is a distance measurement.
The device communicates via near-field Bluetooth, which operates within a fixed and limited range. When that signal dropped at 2:28, it meant one thing. Nancy was no longer within Bluetooth range of her phone.
She had been moved.
Carried or walked or transported far enough from that residence that the signal could no longer reach. 2:28 in the morning is the moment Nancy Guthrie left that house. 41 minutes after the camera went dark. 41 minutes of unrecorded activity inside her home. And at the end of those 41 minutes, A signal that had been transmitting reliably from her chest reached the edge of its range and dropped into silence.
She was gone.
But the Apple Watch told investigators something that the pacemaker timestamp alone could not. Because an Apple Watch with cellular capability is an independent emergency device. It does not require a paired phone to place an SOS call. It operates on its own cellular signal. It is, for an elderly person living alone, the single fastest and most accessible lifeline to the outside world. Investigators confirmed early in the case that the Apple Watch was located and secured by the intruder as an early priority during those 41 minutes inside the house. Early priority.
In a dark house. In the middle of the night.
Moving through rooms that this person had never officially entered. And yet the Apple Watch, a small device, typically sitting on a bedside table or a charging surface in a specific room, was found and neutralized before almost anything else. That does not happen through luck. That does not happen through instinct. That happens because someone described the interior of that house in enough detail that the intruder knew exactly which room to enter, exactly which surface to check, and exactly why that particular small device needed to be the first thing secured. Someone had given him a map of the inside of Nancy Guthrie's home. If you're still watching at this point, drop a comment with "I'm still here." Let's see who's truly following this shocking story. Federal investigators do not build cases on feelings. They build them on probability. And when you lay out the complete picture of what the masked figure on that porch already knew before he arrived, the probability calculation becomes deeply uncomfortable. He knew the camera position. He knew the approach angle. He knew the interior layout well enough to navigate it in darkness. He knew which room the Apple Watch was in and why it mattered. He knew the precise isolation window, the specific hours during which Nancy would be home alone with no one scheduled to check on her until morning.
He knew the schedule. He knew the routine. He knew the house.
None of that knowledge originates with a stranger. Former FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffindaffer stated clearly that in her assessment, the person on that porch did not act alone. There was a second layer to this operation. Someone behind the masked figure. Someone who possessed detailed knowledge of Nancy Guthrie's home, her routines, her daily patterns, and her specific vulnerabilities. Someone who transmitted that knowledge, deliberately or carelessly, into a chain of information that ended with a masked figure standing on a dark porch in the Catalina foothills at 1:47 in the morning. That second layer is where the dinner table enters the investigation. On the evening of January 31st, the family gathered in Annie's home. The conversation was warm and ordinary. Details were mentioned the way details always are at family dinners, without weight, without suspicion, without any reason to believe that the words floating through that warm kitchen were being noted by anyone for any purpose beyond the immediate moment. What time Nancy needed to leave.
That she would be home alone.
That the house would be quiet and dark after 10. That no one would be checking on her until the following morning. Operational intelligence.
Spoken in innocence.
Potentially received in calculation. And then there is January 11th. 3 weeks before Nancy Guthrie vanished, the FBI's forensic electronic analysis identified a significant event at her property. Law enforcement specifically requested neighborhood surveillance footage from that date. The working conclusion among investigators was that the property had been visited, observed, or accessed in some capacity on January 11th, a full 3 weeks before the night she disappeared.
3 weeks.
The planning window for this operation did not begin on January 31st. It did not begin with a dinner conversation. It began at least 3 weeks earlier, when someone stood outside that house on a quiet afternoon and decided that the woman inside was a target worth returning for. What happened in those 3 weeks between January 11th and January 31st? What information moved through what channel to confirm the target, to finalize the timing, to transform a reconnaissance visit into an execution? What was learned in those weeks that made the dinner on January 31st the final piece of the puzzle? What did someone hear at that table or know about that evening that converted 3 weeks of planning into a go signal? Those are the questions the FBI's behavioral unit has been working from the very first week of this investigation. And they are the questions that the evidence, piece by piece, keeps pointing back toward with an insistence that is impossible to dismiss. Nancy Guthrie spent more than 50 years on that street. She watched her children grow up in those rooms. She grieved her husband in that house. She woke up every morning to the same desert light through the same windows and built a life so completely rooted in that place that the thought of her not being there is a kind of wrongness that her community has not yet found words for. She left that house at the end of a family dinner on January 31, 2026, and the garage door closed behind her at 9:50 in the evening. She has not been found. The investigation remains active. The FBI has 13,000 tips in their system. They have a physical profile from cloud-recovered footage. They have a pacemaker timestamp precise to the minute. They have evidence of a planning window stretching back 3 weeks. They have a behavioral profile that points toward a second layer of involvement behind the masked figure on the porch. They have a chain of information transfer they have been reconstructing since the first hours of February 1st. The evidence is not silent. Every data point Nancy left behind, in timestamps and Bluetooth signals and recovered footage and the precision of 41 minutes of targeted movement through her home in the dark, is still speaking. And somewhere in the Tucson desert, the answers to the questions this evidence keeps asking are still waiting to be found. Nancy Guthrie deserves those answers. Her family deserves those answers. And this case will not go quiet until they arrive. If this breakdown hit you the way this case has hit everyone who has looked closely at the evidence, there is one thing I need you to do right now. Subscribe to Story Soft the Missing J. Hit the bell so you never miss a breakdown on this channel. And drop your thoughts in the comments below. What does the January 11th detail tell you when you put it next to everything else? What does the Apple Watch precision tell you about what this person knew before they walked through that door? What do you think investigators are still chasing? Leave it below. This channel reads every single comment. Share this video with someone who needs to know Nancy Guthrie's name. Because the most powerful thing a community can do for a missing person is refuse to let the story fade. Keep her name out there.
Keep the pressure on.
And stay with this channel, because this case is not over. And neither is our coverage of it.